Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, I'm here this week with MP Alexandra Mendès, MP for Brossard-Saint-Lambert. She's the Assistant Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, and she's the Chair of the Canadian Parliamentary or Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. And I figured because there's been so much interest in the Commonwealth in the last couple of weeks, given the unfortunate events around the demise of the Crown, that we could talk a little bit about what some of these Commonwealth parliamentary associations do and why they matter for parliaments across Commonwealth countries. So, Alexandra, let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Dale, for inviting me to talk about the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, with which I've been associated since 2008 when I first became elected. It is, for me, a fascinating transformation of empire into association and into collaboration. And very specifically, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association is the second oldest parliamentary association in the world after the IPU. It was founded in 1911, so it has quite a history behind it. Obviously, when it started, it was mostly between Britain, Canada, founding member, Australia, New Zealand, um, and it was mostly to uh, reinforce and exchange and uplift, if you wish, parliamentarians in systems that follow the Westminster system. That was the basic intent. It has grown from that. It's mostly now an association that is devoted to the upskilling and training of parliamentarians, mostly in parliamentary democracies. Not all, some are
Mhm.
presidential democracies, some members, but the majority are parliamentary democracies. And there is a big difference in the role of parliamentarians in those systems. But it nowadays counts 56 members. The latest two are Gabon and Togo, not even countries that had any links to the UK, but who have asked to join. And I think because they value the quality of training and sharing of best practices that we bring to the association.
This notion about upskilling is interesting. And you and I have spoken previously about ways in which these associations help train other parliaments and their
Mhm.
officers. So tell me a little bit about how that works.
That is a very important part, actually, because it's not only about parliamentarians, it's also about all the staff, the table officers and the clerks who work with parliamentarians. So there's an enormous amount of workshops and seminars and training sessions that are offered at all levels. But one of the things that has been very successful in, I would say, the past 20 years or so has been what we call the twinning experiments.
Okay.
And in Canada, for Canada, very specifically, this was actually something started by the Pacific region with Australia and New Zealand, helping out the Pacific members in upgrading their own capacity. And then Canada adopted it mostly with the Caribbean countries, members of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. And what we try is to match provincial legislatures with one of the Commonwealth countries in the Caribbean. We've had two very successful ones that have been concluded in the past 10 years with Turks and Caicos and with Guyana. Guyana has been twinned with the British Columbia legislature, and it's going really well. It's been an interesting collaboration, and And surprisingly, well, not surprisingly, but I think some people were surprised at the amount of things that you actually learn also from the other. You think you're going in
Mhm.
because you are an advanced economy, that you're going in and you are the one bringing the training. But I think a lot of my colleagues in BC have found out that there's a lot that they are receiving too from the Guyana parliamentary system, and that they are learning. But one of the, for example, the major gains for Turks and Caicos with the twinning with Prince Edward Island was that they finally started to register and record their debates in their chamber with a Hansard. They had no
Okay.
capacity to have the Hansard, and so PEI has helped them financially and practically in getting the Hansard to be the official register of their debates.
That's interesting. And I think it's also interesting that in Canada, we've got the provinces who are also participating,
Mhm.
and not just the federal government. So it's kind of
Yeah.
giving
Provinces and territories. We have 13 branches in all in Canada, plus the federal branch. So it's actually a very vibrant association in Canada itself. We have a regional conference every year. This year it was in PEI in July, and it changes from province or territory year to year. But it's really, I think, very helpful to parliamentarians to belong to this association and to take part in all that is offered for the upscaling.
Mhm. And I would also think that Iqaluit and Nunavut and
Anyway.
Northwest Territories participation would also be of particular interest to a lot of Commonwealth countries,
Mhm.
given how their spin on Westminster democracy is so different from the mainline.
Yes, it is. And actually, it's very similar to what you find in the Pacific. It's very much a consensus oriented parliamentary democracy. The Pacific region has quite a few of the parliaments themselves that work that way. So whenever they get together and they all belong to what we call the small branches, part of the association, they actually have a lot to share, and it's I don't think it's something that could work successfully in the bigger legislatures,
No.
and actually because we don't even have a tradition of that.
Yeah.
So culturally it would be a big shock, I think, but it certainly is worth listening to what they often share with us, but particularly what they share among themselves and how they get best practices
Mhm.
among the different legislatures. Yeah.
There was a big conference this year. I think it was in Halifax. Tell me
Big
a
in
little bit
Halifax.
about how that what happened there.
Well, in 2004, Canada had hosted the international conference for the last time, because in 2004, Canada ended up with costs that were absolutely beyond reason. And Canada told the headquarters that it would never again accept to host the conference if they didn't change the formula under which the conferences were organized. Well, it took 18 years, and I take a little bit of pride in the work I did on that, because it
Okay.
was under while I was vice chair of the international executive that we changed the rules. And once we did, Canada said, okay, now that the rules are changed and that they fit better with what our parliamentary accountability requests from us, we will host it. So we did in Halifax. We had to move it twice because of COVID, obviously. It was supposed to be in January 2020. In a way, I'm very glad it wasn't because, sorry, 2021, because it was probably going to discourage a lot of people. This year, we had beautiful weather. Everything worked really very well. Hats off to the team in Canada who organized it all with the headquarters, but everything went really well. We had over 550 participants. I think it actually went over 600, but I'm not absolutely certain, from 42 countries, which was very good. And when, 3 months ago, we weren't even sure we were going to go ahead because, again, COVID
Mhm.
restrictions. So um, very happy that we did it, that Canada did it and pulled it so well. And it was perhaps one of the most um, productive and fruitful conferences we had in many years. There were no big, just there was no dissension between members. We made quite some progress in terms of women parliamentarians in ensuring that delegations to the conference have a certain obligation of uh, sending women parliamentarians to the conference. And believe me, that was not right. That was not something to take for granted, because
Mhm.
you may imagine some legislatures, some jurisdictions are a little less um, accepting of that fact.
Yeah.
But it was actually quite meaningful, and I'm very happy we had it and that we did it this year in Canada.
I'm curious about kind of the role of parliamentary diplomacy in this as well, because there is some controversy in the Commonwealth around the certain members and human rights concerns, I think we'll put generally. And I'm wondering how these kinds of conferences help foster those discussions.
Well, they foster the discussions. Do we make progress? Not always. And I mean, we have to be realistic. There are things that it takes time for certain cultures and countries to come to terms with what we in more progressive democracies have already attained. Um, and I mean, I'll just give you the whole issue around parliamentarians with disabilities. It
Mm,
took a long time for the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association to actually finally get that issue into the mainstream, and to make parliaments all over the Commonwealth accept that they had to be inclusive. They had to find the measures and the appropriate accommodations to have parliamentarians with disabilities. Minister Carla Qualtrough actually gave one of the workshops at this last conference in Halifax. So that I would consider a big success. We haven't been as successful, for example, with LGBTQ issues. But again, we try, we continue to have the discussions. And that is diplomacy. You know, diplomacy is not a victory at every turn. We
yeah.
have to keep on working about it, and bring the arguments that convince people that it is the best way forward. Again, about women parliamentarians. First, I always react when people try to, or other jurisdictions try to corner women's issues as a minority issue. We're not a minority. We're half of the population of the world.
Yeah.
And I actually make that very obvious in whenever I speak at the CPC, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference. Stop treating us as a minority. We are not a minority. We are seeking equality, yes, like
Mhm.
so many other groups, but we are not a minority. So, it's ongoing. It's ongoing, but you have to believe that multilateralism in these issues is most definitely the more effective way of bringing um, sensitive subjects to the attention of people who sometimes may not even have thought about them. And again, going back to parliamentarians with disabilities and staff with disabilities, because we're talking about staff in parliament too.
Yes.
Um, I'd say 10 years ago, nobody thought about it. Nobody even had the reflex to think that people with disabilities had as much the right to become parliamentarians as able-bodied people. So yes, I think we have victories that we can be proud of, and it's slow going, but it's good going.
Is there an issue that you guys have on the burner that you are hoping to make some progress on in the next couple of years or couple of conferences?
Most definitely LGBTQ issues. It is very almost taboo in certain jurisdictions, and whereas for many of us in progressive democracies, it has become part and parcel of how we deal with minority groups seeking equality. So that is definitely the one subject that still needs quite a bit of work, and that we hope to continue addressing as we go forward.
All right. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to do this, and hopefully
It's
we'll
a
do this again.
pleasure. It's a pleasure. And whenever.
All right.
Very, very glad to have done it. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
You too. Bye.
And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.